I will tell you what post Keth-Arvath was before she arrived, because I was there. I need you to understand the post as it was, not the story people tell now, not the designation it carries in the records since the filing, but the actual ground, the actual rock, the actual smell of the place before she changed what it meant. Post Keth-Arvath sat on a canyon rim above Sector 12, in the contested dead zone between the Arvathi Frontier Command's southernmost operational boundary and the Keth-Arvath insurgent front's established approach corridors. The canyon was called the Sorrow Shelf by the soldiers who had served there, those of us who survived long enough to give it a name. It was not a name we chose ironically. The rock was pale gray limestone that absorbed heat through the day and radiated it through the night so that the post existed in a state of permanent low-grade thermal stress. The canyon walls were 60 meters deep on the south face, sheer, and the approach from below was a series of natural ledge systems that the Keth-Arvath had used as infiltration routes since the Frontier Command first established the position 11 years before I arrived. The limestone at the rim crumbled at the edges, not dangerously, not in the sense that the ground was unstable, but in the way that a thing crumbles when many people have stood on it for many years and left their wear on it. There were indentations in the rock at the observation post's primary standing position, where the boots of 6 rotations had ground down the surface by perhaps 4 centimeters. I noticed this on my first day and thought about it often in the months that followed. The post was not large. A prefabricated observation module bolted to the canyon rim, a secondary weapons emplacement that had been damaged in the 3rd year of the post's operation and repaired 3 times and was never quite right after the first repair. A supply depot, reinforced, that doubled as a bunkroom for 6 soldiers and 1 officer. A communication relay tower, which was the post's actual reason for existing. The relay served the entire southern sector grid, and without it, 3 forward command positions went dark. The tower was the thing you were assigned to protect. The tower was the thing the Keth-Arvath wanted down. 6 rotations. That was the record when I arrived. 6 full rotation cycles, each one nominally 8 months, each one ending with a casualty report that the Frontier Command's administrative arm had long since reduced to a single-line entry in the post's assignment log. In the 6 rotations before mine, post Keth-Arvath had returned a combined total of 0 soldiers to active duty at rotation's end. The post did not kill everyone dramatically. It did not kill everyone at once. It killed them incrementally over weeks, through the combination of exposure, infiltration contact, and attrition. A soldier lost here, a soldier lost there, the post shrinking toward the end of each rotation until the last 1 or 2 survivors were extracted by emergency relay, and the next rotation was sent in. The Frontier Command had twice proposed abandoning the post. Both times the Communications Directorate had filed objections, citing the relay tower's strategic necessity. Both times the post had been restaffed. The post's unofficial designation among the soldiers who staffed it was the last posting, not because it was the furthest forward position on the frontier, but because it was the last posting the soldiers assigned to it would ever have. I was assigned on my 4th year of service. I had not requested the posting. No one ever requested the posting. I was a watch officer, junior grade, with a record that was adequate but not exceptional, and the Frontier Command staffing algorithm had identified me as acceptable for Rotation 7. I was told by my unit commander, in what I understood to be an act of honesty unusual for the service, that the expected outcome was that I would not complete the rotation. He told me the post had communication equipment worth protecting and soldiers worth expending. He did not say this with cruelty. He said it with the flat procedural certainty of a man reading from a statistical table. I arrived at the post by supply drone in the 4th week of the dry season. There were 3 other soldiers from the previous rotation still in place. The rotations overlapped by 2 weeks for handover, and the surviving 3 from Rotation 6 were the longest-serving soldiers the post had seen since its establishment. The longest serving was a frontier sergeant named Keth-Arvath who had been at the post for 7 months, and who looked at me the way a man looks at a meal he has not yet finished, not unkindly, but with a certain settled resignation about what comes after. Keth-Arvath showed me the post in approximately 40 minutes. He showed me the damaged weapons emplacement, and told me exactly what it would do if you asked it to track a target at an angle greater than 42 degrees from the post's central axis. He showed me the 3 infiltration approach routes the Keth-Arvath used. He did this without a diagram, because the post did not have a current diagram. The map that had come with the original installation showed the ledge system's major routes, but not the secondary paths the Keth-Arvath had developed over 11 years of operational use, and learning those secondary paths was a thing each rotation did on its own. He showed me the supply depot's secondary lock, which did not function correctly in high-temperature weather, and needed to be held with the flat of your hand at a specific angle while you turned the handle. He showed me the communication relay's manual override, which was the only way to maintain the southern sector grid if the primary control board went down, and which required a specific sequence of 14 inputs entered in under 90 seconds because the relay's emergency protocol had a hard cutoff. He told me that learning this sequence was the most important thing I would do at the post. He told me the rest was manageable if you were careful. He was extracted with the other 2 survivors 4 days after I arrived. I watched the extraction drone rise from the rim and disappear south, and I stood on the limestone with 2 other new rotation soldiers and 1 month of supplies, and I understood. In a way I had understood intellectually before, but understood now in my compound sensory organs, and in the acoustic click pattern of my own stress responses, what the post was. I was there for 8 months before she arrived. I am not claiming heroism in that survival. I am claiming care and attention and the particular discipline of a soldier who has been told the odds honestly and chooses to treat each day as a problem to be managed rather than a sentence being carried out. 3 of the 4 soldiers who arrived with me died in those 8 months. 1 in the 2nd month, to an infiltration contact we did not have enough warning for. The ledge approach from the northern route was closer than the post's original survey had mapped it, and the watch schedule we had built assumed the longer distance. 1 in the 5th month, to exposure complications during a week of thermal inversion that pushed the limestone temperatures to levels that exceeded our cooling unit's capacity. 1 in the 7th month, to a direct strike on the secondary weapons emplacement during a coordinated Keth-Arvath push that came in from the south at an angle the damaged emplacement could not cover. I had been at the emplacement when the push started. The soldier who died had moved to cover the emplacement's blind angle on foot, which was the only option available. He understood what he was doing. He did it correctly and completely, and the push did not breach the perimeter, and the relay tower remained nominal, and I wrote the incident report in the standard format with all detail fields completed, and I have thought about that report many times since. I survived because I was careful, and because I learned quickly, and because the post had a logic to it, once you had lived in it long enough, and the logic could be read if you were paying attention. But the logic had a tax. The tax was paid in the soldiers who died while you were still in the process of reading it, and the post was structured such that the tax was always higher than the credit. By the time you understood the logic well enough to use it, the rotation cycle was nearly over, and you were extracted, and the next rotation arrived and began the same process of learning at the same cost. That was the post's real design, not a defensive position, an attrition mechanism with a relay tower attached. By the end of my 8th month, I was the longest-serving soldier in the post's history by 3 weeks. I had outlasted Keth-Arvath. I did not find this particularly comforting. The record I had broken was a record I would have preferred did not exist, and outlasting it felt less like an achievement than like a notation. Still here. The notation was true. It was the best I could say about where I was. When Rotation 8 arrived, I received the handover manifest 2 days in advance, as was standard procedure. I read it on the communication relay's secondary screen. 7 names, which was one more than the standard rotation complement. The Frontier Command had added an extra body, because the post's casualty record had generated another review cycle, and someone in the staffing division had apparently decided that 1 additional soldier was a meaningful response to 8 years of 100% attrition rate. 5 were Arvathi infantry soldiers of the standard line. 1 was a Frontier medical officer, 2nd class, a cephalopogenous secondary support personnel I was relieved to see because my own medical capability at the post had been reduced to the contents of a standard field kit and my own limited training. The 7th name was a notation I had to read twice to understand. It was not an Arvathi name. It used an Arvathi designation prefix, L-class liaison attachment, which was a category I had seen on manifests before, generally indicating a support or communications specialist on a temporary rotation. But the species classification beside the notation was not one I had encountered in a military context. It read, Terran, Class 14, Veth Coral Secondary Assignment. Secondary designation, Deathworld origin confirmed. Current assignment classification, Forward Liaison, Arvathi Frontier Command Bilateral Exchange Protocol. Name listed, Warrant Sauravas. I had heard of Terrans. The Frontier Command's intelligence briefings included a general species assessment that I had read in my first year of service and not thought about since. What I remembered was imprecise. I remembered the phrase extreme environment adaptation, and I remembered the phrase physiological resilience outside standard classification parameters. And I remembered that the briefing had noted the species origin world carried a Class 14 biosphere rating, which I understood in the abstract as meaning the world was significantly more dangerous than any environment I was likely to encounter in active service. I had not expected to encounter one at a frontline frontier posting. The bilateral exchange protocol was a recent administrative arrangement I knew almost nothing about. I reviewed her service file on the secondary relay screen for approximately 20 minutes. What I found in the file was thin. The Frontier Command did not have comprehensive records on the bilateral exchange attachments, and what existed was a summary of her previous postings rather than a detailed assessment. She had been attached to 3 prior Arvathi Frontier postings before Keth-Arvath. All 3 had been classified as moderate exposure forward positions. Her performance evaluations were brief and largely technical. The most informative note in the file was a single-line addition from her previous unit commander, appended at the bottom of the last evaluation. Functions as standard. No adaptation concerns identified. Recommend forward assignment continuation. That note told me almost nothing. I noted that forward assignment continuation from a moderate exposure posting to the last posting was not a continuation I would have described as moderate. Then I put the file away and went back to running the post. She arrived with the rest of Rotation 8. I was on the rim when the supply drone came in, and I watched them come off the transport in the order the manifest listed them. 5 Arvathi infantry, the medical officer, and then her. I registered her physically in approximately 2 seconds, and then spent the next several minutes recalibrating what I had registered against what I had expected. She was small. That was the first thing, and it was not a judgment. It was a measurement, and the measurement was surprising. She stood perhaps to the shoulder of the Arvathi infantry soldiers beside her, which meant she stood to the mid-chest of the tallest of them. She was wearing standard Frontier Command field kit. The bilateral exchange protocol apparently included equipment standardization, and the kit fit her in a way that was functional but clearly sized for Arvathi proportions, which meant it was slightly large across the shoulder plates and slightly long in the leg coverings. She was carrying her own pack, which was regulation weight plus what looked to be an additional 20%, and she was carrying it without visible effort, which I noted and set aside. She had two eyes, forward-facing, dark in color, and a bilateral facial arrangement that I knew from the species briefing was standard for Terrans. Her face was, by Terran standards, apparently unremarkable. I had no reference for Terran aesthetics and did not develop one, but what I noticed was the expression, which was the same expression I had learned to look for on Arvathi soldiers who had done serious service. Not effect, not performance, just the settled flatness of someone whose cognitive resources are occupied with assessment rather than presentation. She was looking at the canyon rim when she came off the transport. Not at me. Not at the post structures. At the rim itself, at the limestone edge and the angle of the canyon drop, and the sight lines to the south. She spent approximately 15 seconds on this, then she looked at me. I introduced myself as the outgoing watch officer. I gave her the same 40-minute orientation that Keth-Arvath had given me. I showed her the damaged weapons emplacement and the infiltration routes and the supply depot lock and the communication relay override sequence. I showed her the same absent diagram problem I had encountered, the map showing the major ledge routes, the secondary paths only knowable from experience. I told her this directly. She listened without speaking. She looked at each thing I pointed to for exactly as long as was needed to understand it, and then she looked at the next thing. When I showed her the relay override sequence, she asked me to run through it twice, and then she ran through it herself once completely correctly. I told her that. She said, "Good." That was the first word she said to me. Not a question, not a comment, a notation. I showed her the secondary paths along the ledge system, the ones I had mapped myself over 8 months, and she asked 3 questions, each one precise, each one about a specific measurement or a timing interval or a distance estimate between 2 points I had described. The questions were the kind a surveyor might ask, or a soldier who was already building a model of the ground in her head and needed the missing data to complete it. I was extracted with the remaining 2 Rotation 7 survivors 3 days after Rotation 8 arrived. During those 3 days, I watched her operate with the particular attention of a man who has been on a killing post for 8 months and has developed strong opinions about what keeps people alive. What I observed was not what I expected. She slept 4 hours out of every 24 in 2 intervals, and was fully alert within approximately 15 seconds of waking, which I checked twice because I did not believe it the first time. In my 8 months at the post I had learned to sleep in intervals as well, but the alertness recovery time after waking in a threat environment typically ran between 60 and 90 seconds for Arvathi biology. The transition from sleep architecture to full threat response takes time, and the post had taught me to manage that gap carefully because the gap was exploitable. 15 seconds was a different gap entirely. I did not know what to do with that information, so I noted it. She ate at regular intervals regardless of environmental conditions. During a thermal spike on the second day, when 2 of the Rotation 8 infantry soldiers reduced their food intake because the heat suppressed appetite, she ate her full ration without apparent difficulty. She moved around the post perimeter at intervals that were not random and were not the intervals I had used. It took me most of the second day to understand that she had read the 3 Keth-Arvath infiltration routes and derived a patrol interval that maximized the probability of intercepting a contact at the most disadvantageous point for the infiltrator. She had done this without asking me. She had done it, as far as I could tell, by looking at the terrain on the day she arrived. She did not explain this to me. I did not ask her about it at the time, because I was still in the process of understanding that it was deliberate, and by the time I understood it was deliberate I was 3 days from extraction, and the patrol interval was already established. I was not sure what to do with this information, so I left it for the incoming watch officer, a competent Arvathi senior corporal named Veth Soren, and I got on the extraction drone and went south. I had every expectation of never thinking about post Keth-Arvath again. I had survived. The post would continue its record. The Terran liaison would last, I estimated, perhaps 6 weeks before the Post found a way to reduce its complement by 1, as it had reduced every complement before. I was wrong about this. I was wrong about this in ways that I am still, in an honest accounting, revising. The information reached me in pieces because the Frontier Command's administrative communication protocols did not treat field post status updates as priority traffic, and because what was happening at Post Keth-Arvath did not, for the first several months, look like anything worth flagging. What I received first were the standard rotation summary reports, which are distributed to all officers who have served at a given post as part of the Frontier Command's institutional knowledge protocol. I read them because I read everything, and because the post had been my world for 8 months, and because I wanted to know how long Warrant Soravas had survived. The first report, at the 2-month mark, noted the post complement at 6 soldiers. This was not unusual. The post typically lost its first soldier within 6 weeks, and 6 remaining was consistent with prior rotation outcomes. I noted it and moved on. At the 4-month mark, the report showed the post complement at 6 soldiers. I read that line 3 times. The post had never been at full complement at the 4-month mark, not once in 6 prior rotations. I checked the figures against the historical data in the Frontier Command's record system and confirmed what I thought I had read. In the previous 6 rotation cycles, the 4-month complement average was 4.2. Post Keth-Arvath was retaining soldiers. At the 6-month mark, 6 soldiers. At the 8-month mark, 6 soldiers. I was, by the 8-month mark, monitoring the post status reports with an attention I would have been embarrassed to admit to colleagues. The post had not lost a single soldier in 6 months. This was not a statistical improbability. This was a number I did not have a category for. I went to the rotation history files and checked. The longest span without a casualty in the post's prior operational history was 11 weeks. That record had been set in Rotation 3 and had stood without challenge because no subsequent rotation had come close to it. Rotation 8 had now more than trebled it. I went back to the historical records. I pulled every incident report, every contact log, every supply requisition, every maintenance notation the post had generated in the 8 months since Rotation 8 arrived. There was a significant volume of it. The Keth-Arvath contact rate during this period was not lower than historical averages. If anything, the records suggested slightly elevated contact frequency, consistent with the front's seasonal approach patterns in Sector 12. The post had been contacted. It had been contacted regularly. The incident reports were filed, each one, in the standard Frontier Command format, with the standard detail fields completed, signed by the rotation's watch officer as the certifying authority. The watch officer for Rotation 8 was Warrant Soravas. I read her incident reports for approximately 4 hours. This is not an exaggeration. There were 19 of them over the 8-month period, which was a higher incident rate than any prior rotation had logged, because prior rotations had not survived long enough to generate 19 reports, and because I gradually understood prior rotations had not been detecting contacts that Warrant Soravas was detecting. The contacts she logged included 7 she had intercepted at what the reports classified as pre-breach point, the point at which the Keth-Arvath infiltration team had not yet committed to the final approach, where prior experience indicated the contact was still detectable but not yet a crisis. Prior rotations had never intercepted at pre-breach point. Prior rotations had encountered the contact when it was already inside the post's defensive perimeter, or close enough to it that the engagement became a close-quarters attrition event, which was how the post had killed soldiers for 6 years. She was detecting them earlier. This was the mechanical explanation. But the mechanical explanation did not fully account for the incident reports themselves, which were spare, technically precise documents that told me less than I wanted to know about what was actually happening on the ground. The reports described contacts, engagements, outcomes. They did not describe how she was detecting contacts at pre-breach point when no prior rotation officer had managed it. They did not describe what the Keth-Arvath teams had encountered when they arrived at the canyon rim in the early hours of whatever morning each incident was logged. They described outcomes: contact neutralized, perimeter secure, relay tower status nominal, no personnel casualties. 19 contacts, 19 reports, no casualties. I requested the full engagement logs from the Frontier Command's intelligence archive, which included the communication relay's passive recording system. The relay logged ambient acoustic data as a secondary function, and the archive retained these logs for 1 year before overwriting. I received them 10 days after my request. I spent a significant amount of time listening to them. What the acoustic logs gave me was not a complete picture. They gave me fragments, enough fragments to begin to understand something that the incident reports had, in their clinical precision, declined to convey. The Keth-Arvath are not a quiet species when they move. Their species biology includes a joint articulation click that is subvocalic, not intentional sound, not communication, simply the mechanical output of their locomotor system operating under load. The click frequency increases with speed and with physical exertion. The acoustic logs from the post's relay showed me, across multiple engagement events, the approach signature of Keth-Arvath infiltration teams, the increasing click frequency as they climbed the canyon ledge system, the peak frequency as they reached the rim approach, and then, in pattern after pattern, across 19 events, a disruption in that signature that preceded the engagement by what the log timestamps indicated was between 4 and 8 minutes. 4 to 8 minutes was long enough to prepare a position. 4 to 8 minutes, at the canyon rim above the primary infiltration route, was enough time to move from wherever she had been to wherever she needed to be, set the weapon's emplacement angle, accounting for its 42-degree limitation, which she had been told on her first day, and appeared never to have forgotten, and wait. The acoustic logs did not record what she did while she waited. They recorded the click frequency dropping as the infiltration teams reached the rim and encountered whatever they encountered. They recorded, and this was the element I kept returning to, the element I could not fully process, that the post did not generate a high-intensity engagement acoustic signature. No heavy weapons discharge of sustained duration. No extended firefight. The engagements, as the acoustic logs characterized them, were brief, precise. The click frequency dropped, and then it stopped, and then the log showed a quiet period, and then the relay's passive recording captured the ambient sounds of the post returning to its baseline, wind across limestone, the thermal tick of cooling rock, sometimes in the late entries, what I recognized as the sound of someone moving across the perimeter in the patrol interval I had watched her derive on her first day. She had not changed the patrol interval. 8 months in, she was still using the same one. I filed a request with the Frontier Command's Bilateral Exchange Coordination Office for a supplementary briefing on Terran service performance characteristics. This was not a standard request and took some weeks to process. What I received, when it arrived, was a document that I will describe as comprehensive in length and incomplete in usefulness. It covered Terran physiology in some detail, the Class 14 biosphere origin, the species' evolutionary history as apex predators on a world with multiple competing apex species, the physiological indices that placed Terran baseline biology at or above what the Frontier Command's medical classification system defined as active service class for most other enrolled species. It covered their sleep architecture, which explained the 4-hour cycle I had observed. It covered their thermoregulatory capacity, which explained the second day's heat and the full ration. It covered their sensory range, which I read carefully and read again because the acoustic detection parameters listed for Terran hearing were outside what I had assumed was a standard biological range for a species of their size and body type. The document spent 3 paragraphs on Terran hearing alone, and what those 3 paragraphs described was a sensory capacity calibrated to a world where the things that would kill you did not always announce themselves before they arrived. The Keth-Arvath subvocalic joint articulation click was, by the document's acoustic frequency tables, well within Terran detectable range. The click at distance was a signal. She had been reading the signal 4 to 8 minutes before it became a crisis, and she had been doing this for 8 months. And prior to her arrival, no one at Post Keth-Arvath had ever done it at all, because no one at Post Keth-Arvath had had the hearing range to do it. The document also contained a section on psychological and behavioral characteristics that the Bilateral Exchange Office had clearly written with some care and some uncertainty. The relevant passage, which I have kept in my personal record since receiving it, read approximately as follows. Terran behavioral patterns in high-threat operational environments do not follow a standard stress elevation model. Extended exposure to threat environments does not produce the behavioral degradation patterns observed in other enrolled species after comparable exposure duration. Terrans exposed to sustained threat conditions exhibit stable performance maintenance with gradual efficiency improvement, driven by environmental learning rather than physiological stress response escalation. This characteristic is assessed as a product of the species' origin world exposure history. The Class 14 Terran origin biosphere presents persistent threat conditions of a severity that, in the frontier command's operational experience, exceed the threat parameters of all currently designated active frontier posting environments. Terran personnel assigned to frontier postings should therefore be assessed with this context. The posting environment does not constitute a comparable threat level to the species baseline. I read this passage 4 times, then I went back to the post's casualty history, then I went back to the passage. The post's environment did not constitute a comparable threat level to the species baseline. I want to be precise about what this meant, because the document was written in the bureaucratic language of an intelligence assessment, and the bureaucratic language does not fully carry the weight of what it is saying. What it was saying was this: Post Keth-Arvath, the last posting, the position that had killed every soldier assigned to it for 6 consecutive rotation cycles, the position that the Frontier Command had twice considered abandoning because the attrition rate made staffing it a rational absurdity. Post Keth-Arvath was, from the perspective of Warrant Sauravas's origin world calibration, not particularly difficult. Not easy. I want to be fair to the record. The engagement logs showed real contact. The Keth-Arvath were real opponents with real weapons and a real tactical doctrine that had worked against the post for 6 years. What she was doing at the canyon rim in the early hours of those 19 mornings was not nothing. She was working. She was precise, and she was careful, and she was, from everything the logs suggested, operating with the particular attention of someone who understood exactly what would happen if she made an error. But she was not operating at her ceiling. That was what the document was telling me in its careful bureaucratic way. She was operating from a physiological and experiential standpoint within a range she managed comfortably. The post was a hard assignment. It was not a Class 14 assignment. It was not her world. It was merely her job. I put the documents away. I went back to my current duties, which were administrative in nature and considerably quieter than anything at Post Keth-Arvath. I thought about what I had read for a long time. The event that finished the picture for me came at the 11-month mark, which was past the standard rotation length. The rotation had been extended by 3 months due to a staffing shortage in the Frontier Command's Southern Sector administrative arm, and Post Keth-Arvath's unusual retention record had apparently resulted in it being deprioritized for replacement staffing, on the logic that if the soldiers there were surviving, there was no immediate crisis. This logic struck me, when I learned of it, as the kind of institutional thinking that emerges when a system encounters a data point it was not designed to process. The system did not know what to do with a post that was not a crisis, because the post had always been a crisis, and so the system treated it like something that could wait. The event was the coordinated push. The Keth-Arvath launched it in the second week of the late season, when the thermal inversion pattern that had killed the Rotation 7 soldier in the 5th month typically made the canyon rim difficult to operate on, and the post's defensive capacity correspondingly reduced. In the 6 prior rotations, the Keth-Arvath had used this weather window for their most significant contact events. In Rotation 7, the coordinated push had been the event that took the last 3 soldiers from the complement before the emergency extraction. It was, in the post's operational history, the season's killing blow, the window when the post was most degraded, most reduced, and the Keth-Arvath most organized. The push that hit post Keth-Arvath in Rotation 8's 11th month involved 4 separate approach teams using 3 of the canyon's ledge infiltration routes simultaneously. The communication relay's acoustic logs documented the approach. I listened to them later, when the archive processed them, and what I heard was the click frequency signatures of 4 teams ascending in a coordinated pattern that the Keth-Arvath's tactical doctrine used when they intended to overwhelm a perimeter through simultaneous contact at multiple points. The logic being that a single defender or small complement could not adequately address 4 separate breach attempts at once. This was sound tactical logic. It had worked against the post before. It had worked against every prior rotation that had encountered it, because every prior rotation had been reduced by that point in their rotation cycle to a complement too small to hold 4 contact points simultaneously, and because the human factor in the defensive equation, response time, detection range, the ability to move between positions quickly enough to address multiple concurrent threats, had not, in any prior rotation, been present. What the acoustic logs showed me was this. The first team's click frequency dropped at 2:17 post time. The second team's click frequency dropped at 2:21. The third at 2:24. The fourth at 2:29. 12 minutes, 4 teams, no personnel casualties logged in the incident report. The incident report for this event was, like the 18 before it, filed in the standard Frontier Command format, with all detail fields completed and classified under engagement type as routine perimeter contact. The outcome field read, contact neutralized, perimeter secure, relay tower status nominal. Routine perimeter contact. I read that classification 3 times, and then I sat with it for a while. I tried to construct an account of the 12 minutes between 2:17 and 2:29 that was consistent with the acoustic evidence and the incident report classification, and the post's layout as I knew it intimately from 8 months of living inside it. The post's perimeter was not large. The canyon rim ran approximately 80 meters in the axis that mattered, north to south, with the primary infiltration approaches distributed across the full length of that axis, and the ledge systems below providing the natural channels the Keth-Arvath used. The weapons emplacement sat at the midpoint of the rim, which was why the 42-degree tracking limitation mattered. At angles outside that envelope, targets at the extreme north and south ends of the rim were in positions the emplacement could not cover. A soldier operating the emplacement to cover the central approaches was exposed on both flanks. 4 teams, 3 routes, 12 minutes. No personnel casualties on the defending side. The emplacement's tracking limitation, which I had described to her on her first day, and which she had clearly factored into every one of the 19 prior incident dispositions, was a constraint she had been working around for 11 months. The coordinated push was designed to exploit that constraint. To put contact at the angles, the emplacement could not cover simultaneously with contact at the angles it could, forcing a split attention defense that no single soldier could execute effectively. She had handled it in 12 minutes without losing anyone. I could not fully reconstruct how. I tried. The acoustic log data gave me the timing but not the geometry. The incident report gave me the outcome but not the method. What I had was the result: 4 contact points, 12 minutes, perimeter intact, relay tower nominal, and Warrant Saravas's signature at the bottom of the form. And the result told me something that the incident reports, taken individually over 11 months, had been telling me in aggregate without my fully hearing it. She was not surviving the post. She was running it. There is a difference, and the difference is not small, and it took me the better part of an hour of sitting with the coordinated pushes acoustic log before I could say it clearly to myself. Every soldier before her had been, to some degree, at the mercy of the post, managing the threat, trying to hold on, doing the work of survival inside an environment that had more ways to reduce you than you had ways to resist. The post's logic was attrition. The post ground you down, and the Keth-Arvath found you when you were ground down enough, and that was how the record had been built. She was not being ground down. The acoustic logs over 11 months showed me a patrol interval that had not changed because it did not need to change. Showed me 19 contact events handled at pre-breach point, which meant the contact never reached the stage where it could trade force against the post's complement. Showed me a coordinated push absorbed in 12 minutes, which was a result I would not have believed possible if I had not seen the acoustic signature myself. She was not managing survival, she was managing the ground. The post had a logic to it. I had told Keth-Arvath this on my last day there, and Keth-Arvath had looked at me with the settled resignation of a man who had survived 7 months by care and attention, and considered this statement accurate in the limited sense that everything has a logic if you live inside it long enough. What I had not understood, what I think no one who had served at post Keth-Arvath before Rotation 8 had fully understood, was that the post's logic was learnable in a timeframe shorter than the timeframe in which it would kill you. But only if the person learning it had the sensory range to detect what needed detecting before it became urgent, and the physiological baseline to function in the post's thermal and attrition conditions without degradation, and the origin world calibration to treat the gap between detection and contact as a working interval rather than an emergency. Those 3 things together produced a different post. They produced a post with a casualty rate of 0 across 11 months of above-average contact frequency. She filed the after-action report for the coordinated push 3 hours after the last acoustic signature dropped. I know the timestamp because the relay's communication log captured it. 3 hours after 4 Keth-Arvath teams had come up the canyon in the dark and found her waiting at the rim, she sat down at the relay's communication console and filed the standard Frontier Command incident report. Engagement type: routine perimeter contact. Outcome: contact neutralized, perimeter secure, relay tower status nominal. I keep coming back to that classification. Not because it was wrong, it was, by the technical definition, accurate. The contact had been handled within the post's normal operational parameters, but because of what it required her to believe about those parameters. To classify a coordinated 14 push as routine perimeter contact, she had to be holding a model of the post's operational parameters in which a coordinated 14 push was within normal range. She had been at the post for 11 months. She had been through 19 contacts before this one. She had apparently revised her model of what the post's normal operational range looked like until the 14 push fit inside it. That is not what the post had done to any prior rotation. The post had revised its occupants' model of themselves, downward, incrementally, over months, until what they believed they were capable of was smaller than what the post required of them. She had apparently run the process in the other direction, building a model of the post's operational requirements from the inside, contact by contact, until the post fit inside what she knew she could do. I thought about the 3 questions she had asked me during the orientation, the ones about measurements and timing intervals and distances between points. I had thought at the time that she was filling in gaps in the model she was building. I understood now that she had already decided by the end of the first day what the post's operational logic was, and that she had been asking me for the precise measurements needed to confirm it. The model was complete before the first contact. The 19 contacts had not changed it, they had refined it. Rotation 8 was extracted at the 14-month mark, 3 months past standard rotation length, when the Frontier Command staffing shortage resolved and a replacement rotation was finally available. The extraction report listed the complement at 6 soldiers, which was the complement that had arrived with rotation 8. The post had not reduced its complement by a single soldier in 14 months. I received the extraction confirmation in my administrative queue, and I sat at my desk for a while reading it. 6 soldiers, 14 months. I knew what that number was supposed to say, and I knew what it did not say, which was everything about how. The extraction report was administrative. It noted the complement, noted the rotation end, noted that the communication relay had maintained operational status throughout the rotation period, noted that the post was being transferred to Rotation 9's responsibility. It did not note anything about what the post had been before Rotation 8. It did not note anything about what had changed. But there was a final line in the Rotation 8 extraction report that I want to tell you about, because it is the thing I remember when I try to summarize what post Keth-Arvath was and what it became. The report included a standard post-condition assessment, which is a brief notation on the post's physical and defensive infrastructure at rotation end, meant to inform the incoming rotation of any degradation or damage that had occurred during the preceding period. The post-condition assessment for Rotation 8 read as follows: Weapons emplacement tracking mechanism repaired and recalibrated, operational above original specification. Secondary supply depot lock mechanism replaced, now functioning correctly. 3 new observation positions established along the south rim with anchor points installed in limestone, locations documented in the attached diagram. Relay tower status, nominal throughout. She had fixed the weapons emplacement. She had fixed the supply depot lock. She had added 3 new observation positions to the south rim. The weapons emplacement had been damaged since year 3 of the post's existence. 5 rotations of soldiers had lived with the 42-degree tracking limitation, because fixing it required parts that were not in the standard supply manifest, and a mechanical competency the rotating complement had not had. She had apparently sourced the parts through the bilateral exchange supply chain, or fabricated what she needed from available materials, or done something else entirely that the report did not specify, because the report did not explain how. It just noted that the limitation was resolved. The emplacement now tracked to 68 degrees in both axes. The gap that had defined the post's defensive geometry for 8 years, the angles the Keth-Arvath had used in their coordinated pushes, the angles no prior rotation had been able to cover, was closed. Not patched around, as she had been doing for 11 months. Closed. The south rim observation positions were anchored in limestone at intervals that, when I looked at the diagram, mapped exactly to the blind angles created by the canyon's natural topography. The positions where the Keth-Arvath's approach routes created coverage gaps that the existing observation module could not address. She had identified those gaps on her first day, because the terrain had told her they were there, and she had addressed them over 14 months with anchor points that would remain in place for subsequent rotations. The diagram she attached to the post-condition assessment was hand-drawn, precise, with distance notations in her handwriting, small, even, the numerals consistent with each other the way a surveyor's are. She had mapped the south rim herself. The survey the post had received on original installation did not include it. She had walked it, measured it, and documented it, and appended the result to a standard post-condition assessment as though this were a thing that was routinely done. It was not routinely done. No prior rotation had done it, because no prior rotation had been in a position to do it. She had done it in between running the post's normal operations and handling 19 contacts and absorbing the coordinated push in 12 minutes. The after-action report for the coordinated push was the last report filed by Warrant Saravas under post Keth-Arvath's log entries. After that came the administrative traffic of rotation handover, the supply transfer documentation, the relay tower's maintenance log certification. Her final entry in the post's official record was a communication relay status confirmation, filed on the morning of extraction day. 3 words: relay status nominal. I looked for her in the bilateral exchange protocol's personnel directory after the extraction. I found a record with her name and a posting notation for her next assignment, which was a different frontier position 3 sectors north of Keth-Arvath. I did not contact her. I had no reason to, officially, and I did not have a clear account of what I would have said if I had. Thank you would have been accurate and insufficient. You fixed the emplacement would have been accurate and beside the point. What I would have wanted to say, if I had the language for it, was something about what the post had been and what it cost the people who served there, and what it meant that she had walked onto the limestone for the first time and read the logic of the place before the dust from the extraction drone had settled. I did not have the language for it. I still don't. What I have instead is what I have tried to give you here. The post as it was, the post as the record shows it became, and the distance between those 2 things, which is a distance I can measure in 14 months and 6 soldiers, and a casualty figure of 0, and a weapons emplacement that now tracks to 68 degrees. I have served at 2 postings since Keth-Arvath. Both were quieter than the canyon rim above Sector 12, and both were, in the way that all postings are in the end, problems to be managed with care and attention. I manage them that way. I learned to do it at the last posting, which is no longer called that. The soldiers who go there now call it the fixed post, because the emplacement works and the locks work, and there are 3 anchor positions on the south rim that no one who served in the first 6 rotations put there. The post had a logic. She read it in less time than it took the post to kill anyone else. What she did with what she read was not heroic in the way that word usually means. It was precise. It was thorough. It was the work of someone whose calibration ran from a different baseline than ours, who looked at the canyon rim and the limestone, and the 3 infiltration routes and the Keth-Arvath click frequency signatures in the dark, and filed it, correctly and without ceremony, under the heading of things that were within the range of what she could manage. She never said it was easy. She never said anything about it at all, as far as the record shows. She filed 19 incident reports and a final relay status confirmation, and a post-condition assessment that fixed 3 things that had been broken for years, and added 3 things that had been missing. She wrote routine perimeter contact on every one of those reports and signed her name and went back to work. The record was always right. It just took me a while to understand what it was saying.